Thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here and to get a chance to share a little bit with you today about crucial conversations. And specifically, we're going to talk about sellouts. Have you ever sold out? You remember a time when you sold out? Or maybe you really don't understand the term. So put yourself in this person's position. I'm going to walk you through something, and I'm going to ask you what your reaction might be. Let's say that you've been asked by your company to do a major presentation at a national convention. And you've made all your preparations, you've flown in a day early, you've got everything ready. You get up that morning and you're making some fine-tuning, and you look at the clock and you realize that this was the weekend of daylight savings and you forgot to change the clock. And you're already late. So you quickly gather your stuff together, head out the door, across the street into the convention center, and there across the hallway is your elevator. You make a beeline for the elevator, you turn around, you hit the 11th floor, the door isn't closing, and across the lobby you see this man kind of struggling. And he's carrying some boxes, and he's coming towards your elevator, and you have a decision to make. And you reach down and you hit the button, and the door closes just as he gets there, leaving him outside. Now, as the elevator is ascending, let me ask you a question. What's going through your head? What story are you telling to justify what just took place? Well, after all, there are 5 other elevators out here, and, this is really important. This could eventually affect his life. Maybe you even go to the extent to say, I'm such an expert in cardiovascular awareness that I could tell that this gentleman was out of his target heart zone, and he needed to set those boxes down, so I was really doing him a favor. What are we doing? We've sold out. We knew it was the right thing to help this person, and we didn't do it. And in order to make myself feel better, I start justifying this with what we call victim, villain, and helpless mentality. Now, the interesting thing is this. Whenever you sell out, you've got 2 options, and only 2 options. You can either admit to your sellouts, I really should have held the door for that guy. I'm going to do that next time. Or you can begin to justify your sellouts by using victim, villain, and helpless stories. Now, the interesting thing is, if you don't do the first, if you don't admit that you've sold out, you will do the second. And the interesting thing is, in order to change the story, you have to acknowledge that you had a role. That door didn't close all by itself. No, I had a role. I actually punched the button. But I can never figure out those greater than, less than, is it closing? See how I tell the story so quickly and so easily? It's interesting. Now, the interesting thing also is this. The bigger the sellout, the bigger the story, and the more tightly I cling to that story rather than admitting that maybe there was something else that I could have done. Well, sellouts can be small things as well. And I'd like you to put yourself in a position here of kind of critiquing yourself. Think about your life over the last couple of weeks, maybe even the last month, and ask yourself if you have sold out on any of these. Let's say you believe that you should help someone, but you don't. Now, you don't have to raise your hand, okay? 2, you think you should apologize, but you keep putting it off. I know I should apologize to that person. Number 3, you see a big problem with a plan that somebody is proposing in a meeting in your organization, and you think you ought to stand up and say something about it because you see some built-in problems, but you don't. Or maybe you failed to complete an assignment on time, but nobody's mentioned it. No one says anything. You think you ought to say something, but you don't. And then you have information that a coworker could use. But you know what? I don't like that coworker, and I don't give them that information. Can you identify with any of these sellouts? Because sellouts can be even small things. Now, the interesting thing is this. We ask, why do we tell stories? Well, the truth is that the purpose of victim, villain, and helpless stories is to help us justify our sellouts or our lack of results. You ever made a New Year's resolution? Yeah, I'm going to lose a few pounds, I'm going to do this. And about a month goes by and people say, well, how's the program going? And you're saying, well, I've been a little busy and I've got all of these reasons to justify why I don't have those results. And this starts at a very young age. I have been blessed with 6 grandchildren, 5 boys and 1 girl. And none of my grandkids have ever been anyone, for some reason, who writes on walls. It's just never been part of their, kind of process of growing up. But my daughter called the other day and said that she was putting Braden, my 3-year-old grandson, down to bed and was putting him in the bunk bed for a nap, and she looked up and there was this mural on the wall. And she looked at him and she said, Braden, who did that? And he looked at her and he thought for a second and he said, maybe Sister Bryn? And she said, no, I think Sister Bryn at the age of 1 probably couldn't do that. And he thought for a second and he said, maybe Daddy? She says, no, I don't think Daddy is into writing on the walls, and you know that we have a rule that we don't write on walls. And then his eyes grew very big and he played his trump card and he said, maybe God? Isn't it interesting? It starts at a very young age. We tend to justify ourselves with victim, villain, and helpless mentality. Now, what's the solution to all of this? Well, the solution is basically this. You've got to tell the rest of the story. Yes, that's right. On an NPR station in your town at noon, you will hear a gentleman by the name of Paul Harvey, and he will start his little segment with, and now for the rest of the story. And there is often more to the story than we're willing to admit. And I've got to do 3 things. So we're going to try to give you 3 skills to actually avoid these sellouts. The first is simply to assess your role. Did you have a role on the elevator that day? Or did it close by itself? Maybe humanize others. Maybe this person who's coming towards you really is a good person after all, and they could use some help. And then lastly, how do you turn yourself from helpless into able? If you've ever been a person who said, well, there wasn't anything I could really do about it, often that's not true. Now, I'd like to kind of delve a little bit more deeply into each of these 3 skills, and I'm going to do it via a story where I failed miserably on all 3 of these. So hang with me. Listen to the story, and then I'm going to take you back into the story, and I'm going to help you to see the victim, villain, and helpless mentality, and where I failed to assess my role, where I failed to humanize others, and where I failed to turn myself from helpless into able. One of the things that I had a privilege of doing for about 15 years is coaching men's basketball at the college level. And the very last year that I coached, a number of years ago, we had a fairly good team, and our team made the playoffs by 1 game. Now, if you understand seedings in basketball, if you are the last person to be seeded, who do you get to play in the first round? Number 1, yeah. And this happened to be a team called Castleton State, Vermont. We had not beat this team in 5 years. Now, I had some questions about where they got their players from. See the story I'm telling myself already? Because this was a Division III school. You weren't supposed to be handing out scholarships. Well, anyway, we get up to Castleton State, and to make a long story short, we play the game of our life. And there are 17 seconds left on the clock. The ball is in our possession, and we're behind by 1 point. And I can see the headlines now. Atlantic Union ousts Castleton State in the first round of the tournament. So my assistant coach draws up a play. We call a timeout. He draws up a beautiful play to get the ball into the hands of my point guard. Now, I was very blessed to have a player on my team that year that should have never been at a Division III school. He actually should have been at a Division I school because upon graduation, he was given 3 tryouts by the Los Angeles Lakers. That's how good he was. And that's how confident I was that this was going to be an upset. So the official hands the ball in, and the play is running flawlessly with 1 minor exception. We set a pick across the top of the key, and as that pick is set, the Castleton State player who was guarding Arian begins to trip and fall as he goes up to take his shot, and he takes his forearm and he shoves him. The ball leaves his hand, it flies to the front of the rim, bounces up, hits the edge of the backboard, falls back down onto the rim, teeters just slightly, and falls outside of the basket. The ball hits the floor, the horn goes off, indicating that the game is over, and no official has blown a whistle, indicating that there was a foul. I was ballistic. Now, I had a problem. I had several problems. One of the problems was this. we developed a program around a code of ethics. And we have had a code of ethics for officials as well as for players, no matter how they performed. And you know what? I was choking on that right now. I was pacing back and forth, wishing I'd never put that code together. And finally, the two officials, and catch this, the two Vermont officials, do you see what I'm doing in my head already? Grabbed their jackets, and one of them was the head of the Vermont Association for Basketball Officials. They began walking in front, and his name was Jack, and I yelled out to him, I said, "Jack, you swallowed your whistle." Now, that may not sound like much of a violation of mutual respect, but you see, Jack knew that I was also a certified basketball official. And so somebody from within the fraternity was questioning their ability and their courage. And we know now that when people violate mutual respect, they either go to silence or violence. Where do you think he went? You're right, it was violence. He was in my face, and he said to me, "Nelson, I want you down in the room right now." So I'm walking down to the room, and while I'm walking down, I'm gathering some data so that I can critique his officiating for the last 5 years. I figured if that would be helpful, you know. See, when you sell out, you tend to get yourself a little bit more deeply embedded. We get down to the room, he's in my face, I'm in his face, and then he simply says this. He backs up and he says, "Nelson, I was wrong." And I backed up and I said, "Jack, you got to be kidding. That's really big of you to admit that." He says, No. I wasn't wrong about the call. I was wrong about you." I knew he was right. I had failed to handle this in a way that I had handled it in the past and that I told my players we had to handle it. We had a great talk, but I had another problem now. I came around the corner and I had 12 men who were waiting for me. And what do you think their response was? "Did you give it to him, coach?" I said, "Sit down." Teachable moment. I said, "I want to be clear. There's nothing wrong with questioning an official. What was wrong is that I sold out in terms of how I did this and where I did this. And I failed you." Now, I got to tell you, it was a long 3-hour ride home. Not because we hadn't played well, but because at a critical moment I had sold out based upon the values that I knew I should be espousing at a very, very critical time. So let's walk through this. Turn yourself from a victim into an actor, all right? Was I a victim? Yeah. Was I playing the victim? Yeah. If you'd have asked me right after the game, I'd have told you, here's my victim data. Playing at Vermont school with Vermont officials, with Vermont fans, okay? And I became such a victim that I couldn't see past my sellout when it actually occurred, okay? What we have you do is ask this question: what am I pretending not to notice about my role in the problem? Secondly, we need to turn others from villains into humans. Say, I had villainized the official. And one of the things that we have you ask to help entertain a different view of this is to ask, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this? But you know what? I wasn't viewing this official as a reasonable, rational, and decent person. In fact, I was so emotionally flooded that I never asked him the critical question that I should have asked him. I never asked him, "Did you see Arian get pushed?" Because I'd made an assumption, and the assumption was what? That he'd seen it and he had ignored it. You know, it's one of those, that's my story and I'm sticking with it kind of scenarios, all right? So how do we turn others? Well, we ask, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this? And the truth is I knew that there might be a possibility, having been an official myself, that maybe in the midst of that play, somebody walked in front of him or came in front of him and he didn't see it. So he may actually have done the right thing. And then lastly, how do you turn yourself from helpless into able? You commit to corrective action by asking, what should I do right now to move towards what I really want? See, when he said, "Nelson, I was wrong about you," I knew exactly that he had me. Now, I didn't feel emotionally like I wanted to do anything different, but I knew I had to act upon that if I was going to be someone of principle, be someone who was aligned with what I really felt, and I began to walk the walk. So never forget, when you sell out, you've got two options. You can either admit to it or you can justify it by victim, villain, and helpless mentality. Thanks so much.